Alright, YouTube, so we are back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today we're looking back at the Famitsu interview that Nomura did recently that we kind of covered, and looking at a different translation of something that he discussed. And the reason why we're looking at this other translation is because it seems to imply that when it comes to DLC for Remake, there wouldn't be any more, if any at all, until after the entire Remake project is done. So potentially, Game 3 and beyond, if there even is a Game 3. The issue with this, of course, is that it's kind of hard to translate Japanese to English perfectly. It's kind of down to interpretation, but still we're going to look at this. Now this comes to us courtesy of Crimson 7 Phantom over on Reddit. Viewer of the channel, I've used quite a bit of their posts over on Reddit. They have good ideas, theories, questions. Now the translation comes to us from Ulta Masamune or Masamune. I can never remember how to pronounce Sephiroth's goddamn sword. Nomura. For the sake of a convenient transition to the new hardware, we found it necessary to separate the new Yuffie episode into its own DLC. However, our original intent was not to create DLC, but to deliver a PS5 version of Final Fantasy VII Remake. As such, there are currently no plans for DLC. This time around, with Integrate paving the way, we've been able to smoothly transition into developing the sequel. We're giving top priority to concluding the project, so if you must ask about DLC, I'd say there probably won't be any until after the rest is finished. And that's where we run into the discussion of what exactly does Nomura mean, right? Because he says that there's no plans for DLC. Their Yuffie episode wasn't even meant to be DLC, but something about the transition to PS5, it became its own piece of DLC, which I don't even entirely understand what that means. But it comes down to these words right here, concluding the project or completing the project, however you want to interpret the Japanese. What does he mean by this? Is he talking about the sequel that he mentioned previously in the answer, or is he talking about, the remake project as a whole? That's kind of where we don't really know. If I had to hazard a guess, I feel like it'd be the former, though. Like we talked about previously about there not being any DLC until Part 2 is finished, because we all assume that there's going to be 3 games. It seems absurd that they could fit the rest of the FF7 story and the new shit that they're doing with Remake into one more game. That seems so ridiculous. So it's got to be at least 3 games. And there's no way they're planning out and already know what they're going to do, the 3rd game. That's so far away at this point. But he could mean the Remake project as a whole, man, because as he said in that interview, there was never plans to make DLC for Remake. It's just they wanted to add additional content with the PS5 version of Remake, but somewhere along the way, I don't completely understand it. They had to make it into an actual piece of DLC. Now, beyond this, we get the translator's interpretation of that translation. It says, in other words, he's saying the Yuffie DLC is a one-time byproduct of the transition to new hardware and shouldn't be considered episodic DLC in the same vein as, say, Final Fantasy XV's DLC. The ambiguity comes from what Nomura means by that, completion, conclusion. At the very least, I think he's referring to the completion of Part 2, but it's possible he means the whole story arc. Now, whether you trust Square Enix to honor this is another matter. I, for one, do not. And I gotta agree with that last part, man, because I, for one, wouldn't trust what they say because they've not been truthful in the past. We talked about this quite a bit. They talk about, Remake was gonna be FF7. I don't want to harp on this too much, but it wasn't. It wasn't, right? It's 50-50. It's pretty faithful to OG Midgar segment, but there's so much additional content, right? And they say that about the future. Part 2 is gonna be, the rest of the FF7 story that but it's also they talk all the time about the new Final Fantasy VII story. So it's we don't even know what the hell they mean half the time. I mean, hell, Remake Part 1 literally ends with the phrase, the unknown journey will continue. How the hell is it an unknown journey if it's following the FF7 story? Because, goddamn, I know every bit of that. So it's definitely new shit. I mean, hell, this Yuffie DLC that we're talking about right now, that's in the background of this video, is literal proof that they're not following the Final Fantasy VII story to a T. And I'm not complaining. I love having some new shit. I'm just saying, this is brand new. So when Nomura, Katase, Square Enix, whoever says that there's not going to be any more DLC for Remake, that remains to be seen, because they absolutely love their money. Now, as for my kind of overall thoughts on this, it's going to be a bit polarizing, because there's people that like a DLC and want more of that, and there's people that want them to just focus on making, Part 2 and Part 3 and shit like that. And I completely get it, but I'm somebody that likes DLC. I like additional content for my games. I love them. I love world building. I love getting more story for other characters. Because it's part of me, people all the time talk about wanting a spin-off game, or a episodic story or something like that follows the Turks more than just what Before Crisis did. And the way they could do that is an episode in Remake that follows Reno and Rude. People love Reno and Rude. And I would love an episode that's just a couple of chapters where we get to play as them. That'd be so fucking fun. And you could do episodic DLC for any of the other side characters / smaller main characters like Vincent, for example. In the original game, of course, he was also optional like Yuffie, which is part of why I'm assuming they're doing a Yuffie-centric DLC for Remake to give her more story. You can do the same thing with Vincent. You can also do it with Kate Sith / Reeve, Red 13, Sid, whoever you want to do it for. And you can do it with some of the main characters, too. You could have a Barrett-themed DLC, Tifa, Aerith, Cloud, whoever. Sephiroth, more Shinra guys, Rufus. Come on, they can do all kinds of shit with this, man. Give me a motherfucking DLC where I can play as Hojo and do some weird, crazy shit. Like, look, I'm not saying I want them to do anything that's going to hinder the creative process for when it comes to Remake Part 2 and beyond, but they could hire and get another team together to start working on, like, episodic DLC or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be episodic. They could do, like, full-on actual DLC. Maybe add a whole new continent to Gaia, and that's a DLC thing, right? You get to go there and explore, and there's all kinds of new shit there or something. That's just an idea off the top of my head. And it doesn't even have to be that. We talked about it before in the past as well. They could do more VR missions, more Corneo Coliseums. When we get outside of Midgard, they could add more stuff to Gold Saucer, more games. You could do more Fort Condor missions, even though a lot of people don't seem to like Fort Condor. I was always just a fan of it as a kid. And there's so many ways you could go with this, man. Like, I'm down for DLC outfits, right? They don't have to give you any sort of bonus or do anything. Just let me, like, buy Cloud's Advent Children outfit and wear it in Remake, or his Kingdom Hearts outfit or whatever, or some brand new shit. You could even do weapons, but you could even go the route of weapons and armor, but then you have to make sure that they're not, like, broken or even really all that good. Otherwise, you're getting into the pay-to-win section, and that's a big problem, obviously. But I'd still like to buy, like, weird, crazy weapons. Like, let me use the Brotherhood from Final Fantasy X in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Yeah, I will buy that right now. But at the end of the day, man, that is just my thoughts on the subject. You do not have to agree with me. It's perfectly fine. If you want them to focus on the main games, I completely understand it. And at the end of the day, regardless, they are a business. And if they need or want to make more money, they're certainly going to pump out more FF7 related content, as we're already seeing with these goddamn mobile games. And I personally wouldn't mind getting more story for more characters. But that's just my thoughts. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't new. What's up, more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, dashingdavidbusiness. I'm on Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more. And nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain or leave it like Cobain.